Today, we're diving into a crime that absolutely gripped the nation back in 1932, a case so shocking they called it the crime of the century. But this story? It's way more than just a famous kidnapping. It's a case that literally reshaped American law, giving us the Federal Kidnapping Act, which a lot of people just call the Lindbergh Law. So, let's get into it.
To really get a sense of just how huge this was, you just have to look at this quote. The famous journalist H.L. Mencken said it was the biggest story since the resurrection, and believe me, he was not exaggerating. This thing wasn't just front-page news, it was a global obsession.
All right, so what exactly happened? Well, on the night of March 1st, 1932, the unthinkable happens. At the New Jersey home of Charles Lindbergh, the most famous pilot on the entire planet, his 20-month-old son, Charles Jr., was taken right out of his crib. Just gone.
And the scene itself was just baffling. The clues they found were so sparse and weird. You had a ransom note just sitting there on the windowsill, some footprints outside, and pieces of this broken, homemade-looking wooden ladder. It was like a ghost had come and gone, leaving investigators almost nothing to work with.
Now, this note was the only voice they had from the kidnapper, and it was a strange one. The demand was for $50,000, but just look at the writing. The spelling, the grammar, it was all off. It immediately made investigators think the writer was probably a German immigrant, and that little detail, it would become incredibly important later on.
So what followed was, well, pure chaos. From the very start, things just went wrong. The crime scene was completely swarmed by reporters and curious onlookers, contaminating who knows what kind of evidence. And the media frenzy just created this massive storm of false leads and unbelievable public pressure.
This timeline really just shows you the absolute emotional roller coaster. The family, they're desperate, so they follow the kidnapper's instructions, paying the $50,000 ransom and some shadowy cemetery deal, just clinging to any hope they had. But then, 73 agonizing days later, that hope was just shattered. The child's body was found, and the case turned from a kidnapping into a murder investigation. And the investigation? Man, it just hit one dead end after another. No usable fingerprints, a totally ruined crime scene. There were even these tragic missteps. A household servant, a woman named Violet Sharp, actually took her own life after being grilled by police, only for them to confirm her alibi later. For months, and then for over 2 years, the case went completely cold. But even with everything going cold, investigators had one last ace up their sleeve. If they couldn't find the killer, maybe, just maybe, they could find the money.
And their strategy here was honestly pretty brilliant. Part of the ransom was paid in these things called gold certificates. Now, this was a really clever move because President Roosevelt had just ordered all gold certificates to be turned in. So anyone caught spending one after the deadline would stick out like a sore thumb. It basically set a ticking clock for the kidnapper.
And then, finally, in September 1934, they get the break they've been waiting 2 long years for. A gas station attendant gets a $10 gold certificate from a customer and thinks, this is kind of suspicious. So he does something so simple, but it was absolutely genius. He just jotted down the car's license plate number on the bill. And that number led them straight to a man named Bruno Richard Hauptmann. And what they found? Well, it was damning. When police searched Hauptmann's garage, they found it. A hidden stash of over $14,000 of the Lindbergh ransom money. After 2 long, frustrating years, the money trail had finally led them to a suspect.
So naturally, this discovery kicks off what everyone immediately starts calling the trial of the century. The media just descends on this little town in New Jersey, and the prosecution starts to lay out its very careful, piece-by-piece case against Hauptmann.
The prosecution's case was like building a wall, brick by brick. It was a mountain of circumstantial evidence. They brought in handwriting experts, they had eyewitness testimony, and of course they had all that ransom money. But the real bombshell was the latter. A wood expert got on the stand and testified that one of its rails was a perfect match for a floorboard that was missing from Hauptmann's own attic.
So the whole trial really boiled down to a clash of 2 very different stories. On one side, you have the prosecution's mountain of physical evidence, and on the other, you have Hauptmann's one and only explanation, the Isidore Fish story. He claimed a friend who had since died had just left a box of money with him for safekeeping. He had no idea where it came from.
In the end, the jury just wasn't buying it. After a trial that had the entire world hanging on every word, they came back with their verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. And the sentence was the harshest one they could give,
death by electric chair. But here's the thing. That verdict? It wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. In all the decades since, people have picked this case apart, and some really serious questions about the trial and the evidence just keep coming up.
Which brings us to the one question that has kept this case alive for almost a century. Was Bruno Hauptmann really guilty beyond a reasonable doubt?
And the reasons for that doubt are pretty compelling. I mean, Hauptmann himself went to his death swearing he was innocent. He even turned down a last-minute deal that would have saved his life if he'd just confessed. Over the years, critics have brought up some serious concerns about witnesses being coached, maybe even evidence being planted. And maybe the most glaring hole of all, with all that physical evidence, not a single one of Hauptmann's fingerprints was ever found on the ransom notes or on the ladder itself. And so that's what we're left with. This question that just hangs in the air. Was Bruno Hauptmann a lone killer who got exactly what he deserved? Was he maybe just one piece of a bigger conspiracy? Or, as his defenders have always insisted, was he a total scapegoat, an innocent man framed for the crime of the century? That is the mystery that still endures.